Welcome to Offshoot, the Fident Capital podcast with host Kevin Choquette. Offshoot is a curiosity-driven conversation that features a wide range of real estate and business professionals. In each episode, we unpack the knowledge, vantage point, and domain expertise of our guests. Then we move beyond the facts and figures and dive into the personal habits and mindset which allow them to be high performers in their respective field. This podcast's objective is simple: supporting entrepreneurs, fostering relationships, and uncovering meaningful conversations that positively impact business.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Offshoot. Today, Eric Naslund, the co-founder and principal of Studio E, joins me on the podcast. Studio E is a 30-person San Diego-based architectural firm that was started by Eric and his partners 37 years ago. StudioEarchitecture.com is his domain, and if you want to see some of what Eric does and what we're discussing, I recommend a quick drop into their projects tab. They are an impressive design firm that works on housing, mixed-use, civic, institutional, and urban planning projects. Eric is clearly a very thoughtful leader. I haven't counted the number of times he said something like, "You've got to think hard about that," but the fact that he's done so on a wide array of issues comes screaming through. I'm not well qualified to express what separates good architecture from bad. However, I feel like it just took something of a masterclass on design principles. Eric clearly has deep domain expertise, and he also demonstrates the power of using thoughtfulness in addressing our relationships and humanity. Listen in as we cover topics that include distinction between practice-centered business versus business-centered practice, how remaining aware that people will live in a space informs their design choices and inspires their practice, Eric's vision to make places worth fighting for, places that his grandkids will fight for, the joy associated with being paid to be creative, how experience is a central aspect of their art or any art and part of their getting better, how to make project constraints into an expression instead of an eyesore or simply a must-have, managing development constraints from the basics of site, budget, and program, all the way to slopes, sun, shade, noise, engineering, and much more, how design quality and costs are not correlated, managing the projection of risk, which is a central aspect of the relationships between developer, architect, and general contractor, how the form of a contract a developer takes with his general contractor affects the risk profile and tenor of the relationship, being intentional in the development of an organization so that it can continue to serve its intended purpose, turning down work unless you can be exceptional in providing value and impact, and how AI may reshape architecture in the world at large. Eric has a very interesting analogy on how photographs impacted painting and how that may be a model for AI impacting everything else. Treating prospective business partners with the same gravity as a marriage proposal, and finally, how conviction, even from dark places, is part of the entrepreneur's survival kit. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Eric, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're very busy. To get us started, could you just tell us a little bit about Studio E and what you guys are all about over there?
Sure. Studio E Architects is a 30-person design collaborative based in downtown San Diego, and we do work up and down the state of California. And we've been at it since 1987. I have 4 other partners, total of 5 of us, and we specialize in a lot of things, but the biggest hunk of things that we do right now is infill housing and affordable housing for nonprofits.
And was that a recent shift that you guys started doing more of the affordable housing, or has that been a central focus throughout that whole 1987 to present kind of journey?
We have been doing tax credit financed affordable housing for 30 plus years. I mean, we did the very first tax credit finance project in San Diego County. We were the architect for it. So yeah, we've been at it for a long time.
And what's the E? Is it for Eric? I know you were one of the main founders, but what is Studio E?
It's funny that I get that a lot because I am the only E initial in the group of partners. But the fact of the matter is that our company name came from our very first office. We were located in a little loft downtown on 8th Avenue, and we were in 711 8th Avenue, Studio E.
Oh, that's funny.
It's a piece of history that goes with us all the time.
Yeah. So what's happening in the business right now? What are you guys seeing in terms of opportunities and challenges?
Well, I would say the really big thing that's happening in terms of the kinds of projects that are coming to us and with the interest level is centered around housing. That is the single biggest hunk of it. And, that's rooted in all kinds of things. Primarily is the need is so great. And in the state and this city, San Diego in particular, have put some really strong legislation in to enhance and make the production of housing happen. So we're getting an awful lot of people who are trying to take advantage of the opportunities that are now present.
I presume that includes the complete communities change within San Diego.
Definitely. We are doing at least a half dozen complete communities projects here in the city, and lots more interest involved. Definitely that.
So I'm pretty familiar with complete communities, but not all the listeners are San Diego based. So I think of it as very forward thinking kind of change to the general plan or zoning. But could you, in your words, you probably understand it better than anybody else I might speak with about complete communities. How do you see the implications of, life before complete communities and the changes that are here now?
Yeah. Complete communities is an effort to put housing at high density into places where it can be supported by transit opportunities. So the city of San Diego identified what they refer to as their transit priority areas, where you have extensive bus lines, trolley lines, etc., quick and easy access to transit. And then they took all the multifamily housing that sits within that and they put it into this complete communities program, which allows you to opt for the underlying zoning or the complete communities housing solutions version. And that one is rooted in the idea that you get a floor area ratio amount. A floor area ratio means you take the size of your site and and you multiply it by a number they give you, and that determines the total square footage you can put on a site. And unlike traditional zoning, where they will tell you the number of units you're entitled to based on the size of your parcel, you can put as many of whatever types of units you want into the envelope that they give you without a constraint on the number of those. So it's a whole different way of thinking about how one calculates density. So it can result in buildings in neighborhoods here in San Diego that are 6, 7, 8 stories tall, that were traditionally 2, 3, and 4 stories. So it's a pretty significant increase in capacity.
And is there a height restriction that comes with the new FAR? I mean, for the sake of illustrating it, if you did 1,000 square foot floor plate and wanted to do a 8 FAR, but you had a 10,000 square foot site, could you go 15 plus stories and still be inside of your 8 FAR?
You can.
Okay.
There is no height limit associated with the program. What the premise is that it will cap itself out automatically. You use the 8 FAR. That's the highest FAR that you can use in complete communities. A lot of the mid-city areas of San Diego are in the 6.5 FAR. So you can, it's as if you took the site, filled it to the edges, and had 6.5 stories worth of building. So you can imagine that you can't actually make a building like that. You wouldn't have windows on the sides or rear and so on. So in order to get daylight into buildings, you have to pull away from the properties a little bit, and you can go up. And now if you pull away, you don't fill it edge to edge. You can go taller. There are other constraints in terms of cost and types of buildings you can build depending on how tall they are. So you're seeing this kind of 7 to 8 story is the kind of natural cap out on wood framing. And so a lot of people aren't going past that, because once you go past that, it becomes significantly more expensive all along the way.
Yep. What are your thoughts? Just like very high level. Complete communities is a net benefit, a net detriment. I think there's a lot of change that comes along with it, and I'm sure there's varied opinions depending upon, how it impacts your particular neighborhood or your particularly parcel. But what are your thoughts about complete communities?
Well, I'm going to give you an answer that is rooted a little bit in my history. I was in my past the president of the University Heights Community Association. I was the chair of the Uptown Planners Community Planning Group, and I was the chair of the San Diego Planning Commission. So I have a long history of working through the community and understanding a little bit about what they do. But I'm also an architect who does this sort of work and trained in really what is the best of urbanism, how you make good urbanism. In other words, how do you make good cities? And I would have to say that there are pluses and minuses to any protocol, frankly. There were minuses to the protocol that we had prior to complete communities. There are minuses that come with complete communities. But on balance, I think it's a really smart strategy. I think the premise of trying to densify parts of the city that give you the chance to live a full and rich experience in life, where you don't have to park a car, you don't have to necessarily drive to things, it is really worth it. And the more we get those kinds of things into these neighborhoods, the more it will cultivate all the kinds of resources. Then the marketplace itself will kind of cultivate the natural resources to put in all the things that you need that you can walk or bike to, and so on. So I think there's a net benefit to it, but these transition phases are going to be disruptive to people who are used to one thing and not the new thing.
Yeah, and one of those things which you just sort of touched on for a moment there is parking. What are the implications here with parking?
Well, the way the Complete Communities program works is, and if you're in a transit priority area, you don't have to provide parking at all. And that's, when I first started in San Diego many years ago, that just would have been, heresy to say such a thing. Parking was something that neighbors would get very wound up about, particularly in urbanized neighborhoods. So yeah, it is in fact controversial, and we're finding that some of the very first developers who were doing it were taking advantage of that, because it's really, really expensive to pay to structure parking into a development, either underground or even into the structure itself. So if you don't have to put it in, it's a pretty significant opportunity to do more housing as a consequence. The downside is that lots and lots of people still have cars, right? And
Right.
so what ends up happening is that our people parking into the neighborhoods or spilling into the neighborhoods to park their cars on the streets. Or what we're starting to see in a few conditions is some developers aren't able to lease the units at the speed that they were expecting, because they don't actually have that resource. And the projects that have it are doing better in the marketplace. And I'm saying this anecdotally. I don't have data to back that up, but that's what I've been seeing.
Yeah, and what about turnover? Have you heard anything about the tenure of a tenancy in a building that's, let's just say, completely parked versus zero parking? And there are only a few buildings that I'm aware of that have zero parking, but have you heard anything about the stickiness of tenants within those?
I confess I have not heard anything about that. I'd be interested to hearing that. A lot of the people we're working with now are trying to figure out ways to develop more parking within smaller footprints, and using things like car stackers or mechanical parking, et cetera, in order to use the space more efficiently. So
Yeah.
you're going to see a lot of that in the future, I think.
I agree with you. We've been involved with some of that. I think we'll get into it as we get into talking about all the constraints that you guys have to navigate in the day to day. But going back to just, you're almost 40 years into this as a principal of a firm that you started. You've had a ton of success in both market rate and affordable housing. And if anybody goes on the Studio E website and looks at the portfolio, I mean, you have an impressive array of work that's been done. But what's it look like for you? What's the day to day? What are you tasked with as a founding principal of a 30-person firm?
Well, I mean, a lot of what I do is make sure that the business runs, but I have partners that also help. So we distribute that load collectively. We treat this as a consensus, because varying partners, whether they're purchasing up and growing their ownership of the company, or like me and one of my partners, we're in the process of starting to sell our shares down. So we're in the process of kind of transitioning over the next number of years as more people own more shares, et cetera. So to answer your question, some piece of any week is dedicated to the running of the operation and the kind of maintenance of the business, of course. But the thing that we all like to do and we want to do, in fact, this is what we're skilled at, is the design and making of buildings and places, and that's what honestly gets me out of bed in the morning. So yeah, I want to do that all the time.
And what's running ops look like for you? You have to allocate work across disparate teams for particular projects, or you're reviewing iterations on design, or are you doing the business development side out there talking to clients? Are you doing HR reviews, performance reviews? Like, what slice of ops is falling to you?
Well, a little bit of all of it. I mean, I think that what we're also doing now is we're in the process amongst the partners to trying to sort through how we distribute responsibilities. I mean, it doesn't make sense for all five of us to do all the same things, but there are things that we have to all talk about and agree on, of course. So yeah, right now, for instance, we're just about ready to launch into annual reviews. So we've been going through and analyzing staff and thinking about compensation and so on. We're hiring new people. We've been, interviewing people and putting out offers and, that sort of thing. So the HR piece of this is always present, but it's especially present right now because it's annual review time. So there's that. And we do a lot of financial work. Every Friday we meet and run through all the kinds of things that we have to talk about. What are some issues? What's the financial situation? What are the prospects that we have on the horizon? Which proposals need to be written, et cetera. We run through all that every Friday.
And what are the core challenges of running an architectural firm? I don't know if this is true, but I've certainly had it told to me that there are a lot of architects in the world who don't really find meaningful work. Not that they might not be talented. I don't know if that's true. Maybe we could start there. Is it true that a lot of architects aren't able to, find meaningful work and have a successful business? And then I guess second part is, what are the core challenges of running a firm like yours?
Yeah. Well, there's sort of two different big picture philosophies about an architecture firm as a business. There is the business-centered practice, and there's the practice-centered business. We are a practice-centered business, meaning that we are focused primarily on the thing that inspires us, that makes us what we are, which is the design and making of buildings and places, and the transformation of the world around us. That's what we care about. And yes, we are profitable, and we do make a good living at it, but that isn't our motivator. Our motivator is the other thing. But there are other firms that are primarily focused around lots of other kinds of businesses. They're centered around the idea of how one increases one's profitability, how one utilizes the skills they have in order to ensure that. And I'm not being critical of one or the other. I'm just saying amongst the two of them, that's us. So.
And the challenges you guys face just in terms of being successful there. I mean, I could see that as a little bit of a litmus test, right? Hey, like we're in it for the art. We also have a business. I could see that some people might be really attracted to that, and others might move away from it, but what's the challenge of being a successful architect?
Well, I mean, the number one challenge always is what's the next job and how do you get it?
Hmm.
And then it gets to be even more complicated when you say, what's the next job that we really want and how do we get there? So there's an awful lot of this stuff that is really about, direct efforts to kind of promote your business and to develop um, your uh, your presence in the community. Of course, that's always a task for any firm or any business, frankly. And we do that. And sometimes you have to compete for work. We do a lot of work for universities. We've worked at 4 different UC campuses, and we have to compete for every one of those jobs. And so you have to be able to kind of make a pitch to an institution a lot of times about why they should select you over somebody else who has every bit as much capability to deliver the project as you do. So there's that.
And how do you guys do that? What is it that, I mean, look, the thing you just said for me, saying that you're a practice centered business, we're in it for the art, would strike me as a differentiator. If I imagine
Hmm.
myself sitting on a committee at UCSD and having
Hmm.
a bunch of businesses, and then somebody who self describes as being art
Hmm.
art first. You're not saying it that way. I guess those are my words, but how
Hmm.
do you differentiate yourself when you've got to go head to head with other groups that you guys deem as capable as yourselves?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this gets to the thing that when you're really young and you're trying to build a business, versus when you have a portfolio and history.
Yeah.
Um, Building the business is really the hard part, honestly, and we had to really work hard to get where we are. But now that we're here and we are competing against our peers, and they are our peers, these are people who I respect professionally and think highly of. But I mean, a thing that we try to always say, and I presume other firms do the same, is what are the nuanced and unique things that make you who you are? And then, really importantly, when you're dealing with trying to communicate to people who may or may not hire you, is what is it that you can do to help them solve their problem, or how can you help them get to the place that they envision and hope for? So that's a really key piece of this for us. Is we're technically proficient and very technically proficient. We're really quite good at what we do, but we also will deliver that kind of something beyond, which is a design or experience or a place that will hopefully be something you're going to be proud of. That's something that will inspire the people who reside or work in it. Something that will make a difference in the community in which you're building, or makes a transformation, and ultimately says something positive about you as the institution or the client who's making it.
Yeah, that lands. I totally get that. Well, I think we'll get into, the early days and how hard it was to get going, because I understand what you're saying, which is with a certain amount of tenure, credibility is kind of given, and then you get to have the fun around, what your unique attributes are, and how your passion might align more with their problem than other people do. Um, but what had you start this whole journey? What had you kind of, as a young man, say, "Hey, I'm going to get into real estate, and not only real
Hmm.
estate, but I'm going to become an architect"? How'd that all
Hmm.
unfold?
Well, I mean, I knew I wanted to be an architect when I was in elementary school. It's kind of funny. I just had this vision that that was what I wanted to do, and and surprisingly, my idea as a sixth, seventh grader was, some parts of my life are directly related to that hope for that young person, and some parts of it are way more complicated and different, and I never would have imagined, right? Um, but honestly, for me, a lot of it falls to what I'm naturally good at. Um, and I think everyone out there, every person has things that they're just naturally gifted at, things that you do better than others. And there's things that you may not do or process in the same way. So I found something that I was really good at right from the get go, and it inspired me. So as I got into high school and started taking art and drafting classes, I was absolutely certain this is what I wanted to do. And then I went off to college, and that's when I really got connected to the idea that the making of architecture is rooted in things that are significantly more important than just the spreadsheet of program needs that somebody might give you to say these are all the things I want to have in the building. That there's a lot more to it than that, and the places that you care about, actually the places that people fight to protect someday. Um, those are the ones that made a difference in that regard. So we endeavor always to make those. I want to make sure that my grandkids are standing up for my buildings and trying to get them made historic or something.
Yeah, right on. Well, let's talk about this idea of architecture and as art or as science. I find this field absolutely fascinating, and you and I share clients. We've worked on the same projects and probably never spoken because I'm on the side of getting the financing once the project's built. You're talking to the developer as they get going, and I'm a little bit tone deaf to the art of what it is you do. I mean, we go, oh, cool building, let's go get it financed.
Mm-hmm.
From your perspective, what is architecture? Is it art? Is it science? How do those two interplay? And I think you just used the term like programming needs.
Mm-hmm.
There's a myriad of things that constrain you as, let me say, like artists, right? Because you don't
Mm-hmm.
have all the money in the world, and you also have
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
a bunch of constraints on, you know, how do you
Yeah.
think of the relationship between the art and the science of architecture?
Well, one of the things that drew me to architecture in the first place is this marriage between those two things. I mean, it's as much about making something artful and beautiful as it is about the engineering and the rest of it to make sure it stood up and met code compliance and everything else. So that part of it, that mix between the craft of making architecture, the craft of making buildings, how you put it together, how you build it, how you figure out how best to spend a client's money. The puzzle of all that is very interesting to me all by itself. But then the part that really inspires me is that any given client can have a site, a program. These are the things I want, and a budget. I refer to those as the givens for any architect. We rarely have any say over those three things. Sometimes someone will come to us and give us some room on one of those three. Like, I have three sites. Which one would you think would be best for me?
What were the three? I got site and budget. What was the one I missed?
Oh, site, budget, and the program. The
Oh
things I
yeah,
want the building to do. The
yes,
the needs
yeah, yeah.
that I'm constructing for. So usually those things arrive in an architect's lap. You don't make those. But I mean, what you do with those ingredients, that's where the art comes in. And you can have. I'm going to tell you that you could give the same three ingredients to a beginning chef and a master chef, and you get dramatically different results. So I think on some level the artfulness is a part of this is just a craft you have to work really hard at and think deeply about, and to do it over and over again so that you get really good at it. That's the master chef piece. um, so yeah, so that piece of it is that you have to kind of take those ingredients, I think, and make something special out of it. And I will tell you that for most of the clients we work with, I've always been really careful to say to every person, you'll never hear me pine for you to spend more money, but I want you to trust me to spend the money you give me as smartly as possible.
Mm. Don't buy the fresh rosemary. We can use that from a jar, but
Yeah.
do buy the fresh tomatoes, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So some of the copy on the website and some of your bio had a comment of people focused architecture. I wonder how that
Mhm.
relates to what you're talking about right now.
Well, in the end, any kind of real estate transaction is a complex financial dealing, right, as you can fully understand. It's really complex. All the resources you have to cultivate, you pull the financing you have to pull, the hoops that you have to go through to get that to happen. Um, you know, the kind of things you have to do to get a permit, to get it agreed to, the resources that it takes you to actually construct it, the amount of labor, materials, time. I mean, anybody who's going to develop anything is somebody who's in it for the long haul and is willing to take the time to do it right. So there's that. So it's the marshaling of all those resources and the rest of it, and being smart with them is ever present in the problem. But I think for me, the part of this then is making sure that the end results don't look like a 3D version of somebody's spreadsheet.
Mm,
You know,
yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's really important that it just not because trust me, the world is full of things that look like a 3D representation of somebody's financial instrument. And it's just like soul killing when you see it happen. It's like, wow, there was an opportunity and you didn't take advantage. That's a bummer,
Hmm. They
you know.
designed only to the constraints and didn't express something more meaningful than that.
Yes, and that gets to the fact is that once you're done building this thing, once you've completed all those complex financial arrangements and pulled your permits and the rest of it, people have to work there or live there or walk by it or interact with it. And man, if you're not going to do something that's going to make a difference in someone's lives, what is the point?
Yeah. I love that. Um, Look, related, and this is something I just in the last few days thinking about our conversation. Um, what is it like to be paid to be creative in this capacity, right? Like everything you just articulated in terms of the marshaling of resources from all the trades, all the consultants, all the different government agencies. I mean, the complexity of these things, if you're not in it, it's almost impossible to explain to people just how
Mhm.
long this process is. But I expect that there's some creativity from, interior design, interior decorators, the landscape architects, even the civil engineering at some level. They could be like, well, look, we could do it this way. But at the top of that has to be you guys, right? I want a beautiful
Mhm.
building.
Mhm.
What's it like to be paid? Like, does the money get in the way? Do you ever get like a writer's block, or do you have divine intervention where you wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, wait, I see it. Like, I'm just really
Mhm.
curious how,
Mhm.
you,
Mhm.
you know, we all know like the story of the novelist, and they just sit at their typewriter,
Yeah.
pound away, and then they ship it out, and the publisher
Right.
says, I'll take it. But we
Right.
hire architects under the expectation that they'll figure it out between
Mhm.
$0 and whatever,
Mhm.
the bill is
Mhm.
to kind of get this thing done.
Yes, exactly. Well, what's it like to be paid to be creative? I mean, I have to pinch myself every morning. I mean, honestly, it's like the most rewarding career I've could imagine. I mean, I love doing this. Absolutely love it. But you're right. The classic blank page, the writer sitting at the typewriter with nothing in it yet, or an architect unrolling the paper and starting to draw. Yeah, it's inevitably a challenge. But I will tell you that most good architects are not reinventing their agenda every single time they start a new project. Most of us actually have a long-standing set of design inquiries that we're pursuing across a whole host of projects, across a whole host of sites, across a whole host of years. And part of your craft is really how do you cultivate the thing that you really want to see happen in the world, and how do you make that on this particular set of circumstances, on this particular site, with this particular client. So it's not a wholesale invention from ground one. Every great artist, every great designer, every great thinker has a line of inquiry that they're pursuing, and that's the same for us.
What distinction would you make between a design inquiry versus a design principle? Are these interchangeable, or how are you thinking about an inquiry?
Well, when I say design inquiry, what I'm saying is it's a kind of an overall philosophy about what it is you think that, I mean, when I think about architecture, I think a lot about what is the role of it in the world, and what's the purpose and meaning of it, and what's my responsibility in that larger framework. A design principle is a way of implementing your vision. So, for instance, we have principles that talk a lot about, for instance, the idea that we will try and make spaces um, that are useful for a variety of needs and are flexible to accommodate them. That's a principle that we pursue on a regular basis. In other words, we don't design spaces that are so specific, so ironed out that it only functions in one way and cannot function any other way. Because the fact of the matter is that life happens, things happen over time, people will change their expectations. This is what makes, for instance, really great old urban lofts really work as buildings across time. They were built in a day to kind of house some sort of machinery or store things, but eventually they became the coolest living spaces in the city, because they were flexible enough to accommodate life as it changed around them. So we have principles around the premise of how do we do that? And that's a way of implementing the bigger vision.
Hmm. So in my business, as a deal comes in, we have sort of three levels of questioning, and it's first what we actually just call a sniff test. Like, hey, does this even pass the sniff test? And then we'll get into kind of investigation, and the last one we actually call validation, which is you're really getting pretty deep into due diligence before we take it on and then go out to market. I'm wondering, you're talking about flexibility as one of the design inquiries or design principles that you guys employ. Is it at this stage where these are not opaque, nebulous concepts, but you actually they're written out? There's no, these are the 14 that we follow. So let's explore, number 7 as it pertains to the third floor of this building. How do you actually put that into practice?
Well, yes. I mean, and if you go to our website, there is a place where our kind of guiding principles scroll through, and you can kind of read them if you want. And some of them are about, being specific to a location or responsive to a climate and so on. But really, in the early days when we were really kind of putting skin on the bone with this, we would think really hard about how are we going to do that on this one. But I have to tell you that what ends up happening as you do this over time is it kind of weaves into your DNA. You just sort of do it from that point forward. And I would say that we're at that point where it happens naturally. But I will also say the danger in getting to that point where it happens naturally is that you sometimes lose track of what your original inspiration is.
Mm.
So what we do around here oftentimes is we'll revisit these things, and we'll have a whole new group of staff, and we'll ask them, tell us when you hear this principle, what do you think this means? And give us good examples of how you saw this implemented in the world. So we're constantly asking ourselves all the time, are we doing it? Are we missing something? Could we be doing this better? Did we not take it far enough? What could be done better? What's next? We're always asking ourselves that.
And look, you're all around the answer to the question I'm going to ask you, but I have to ask it because I'm not a student of architecture. I like to think that I can recognize it when I see it. But it oftentimes for me, I don't know if this is considered architecture or not, but even just walking down the corridor of a specific building can be a really pleasant experience versus ones that they're just done wrong. But I'm not, you would never hire me to do the Onions and Orchids Award, right? They're like, wait, why is this guy calling out what's good and what's not? I'm not that guy. How these principles, I'm sure, are part of it, but from your perspective, what is it that makes good architecture, and how does the layperson ascertain junk, which might just be the program constraints that are the 3D iteration of the Excel spreadsheet from art, from something that your grandchildren will defend? What is good architecture?
Well, that's a good question, and I think that it's rooted in a couple really important considerations. One is people who design things that make a difference in people's experience are always going to have people fighting for the preservation or fighting to live or work in places like that. So if you're really attentive to human experience and you're really attentive to what it means to arrive at a place, to come in, to wake up in a location, or to hang out on a terrace that has the best view, or if you're really a student of human experience and you really pay attention to how people occupy, use, and love or don't love spaces, you will work really hard to make those kinds of spaces happen when it's tasked to you to do it. So yeah, it's being a student of human beings, frankly, is a really key piece of this. And I will tell you, there's a whole hunk of this which is rooted in individual taste. Somebody may just not really like the color yellow that I just put on a building in Lemon Grove. By the way, Lemon Grove. That's why I chose yellow.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I'm telling you that somebody may just, I don't know, they just don't like yellow. Well, I get that. That happens. And sometimes things can be polarizing and different. You may not relate to it. But and in some ways, those choices at the end are really not so important to the attentiveness to how people occupy, use, and care about places. Yeah, so I think on some level, some of this, and I will always get this question like, well, what style do you work in? Well, we don't work in a style per se, because a style for me is a kind of overly simplistic description of something that allows someone to kind of hold something in their head. Well, a craftsman building, everyone kind of knows what that is. But when I think about a craftsman building, I'm thinking really hard about how somebody, what it means about the feeling to be in it, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'm just saying some of this is about fashion, frankly, and some of it is about the long-standing patterns of human occupation. If you pay attention to it, you'll always be successful.
Yes, I believe I understand what you're saying, and I think it is a very clear principle. My question on it is, um, it would strike me that some practitioners of architecture might hold that as a central tenet of their practice, and some might not have that kind of awareness. And does the cost uh, of a buyer of architectural services correlate to whether or not people are thinking about making human-centric space? Can you buy really good architecture that's got this principle for a lot of money and a little money? Can you buy bad architecture for a lot of money and a little money? Is there a correlation at all, or is it kind of the Wild West out there?
I I I would think that the intuitive response to what you're asking is that if you spend more money, you're more likely to get better outcomes, right? I think that that's the kind of transactional nature in which we think about how we conduct our entire lives.
Over time, you would think that is true for sure.
Well, that's what I'm saying is if you're out shopping for a car, if you spend more for the car, you're going to get something that you hope would have better features, better safety qualities, more stylish, whatever it is. Um, but in the world of design, what I'm going to suggest to you is that you can get fantastically great things for little or lots of money, and you get fantastically bad things for little or lots of money.
Yep.
So I'm sorry, there is no perfect correlation there. Um,
No, because it's a function of how attentive that designer is to the kinds of things we're talking about, right?
yes, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
I really do think that's true. There are a lot of people who have access to or capability to work with very expensive budgets and don't make the most of them, and that's disappointing. And I've seen people capture things with just almost no money at all and made something magic out of it. And that's what we're always trying to do. We're trying to make the magic out of whatever we have, whatever we're given. We want to make magic out of it.
I love it. So you mentioned it earlier in the conversation here, but constraints, right? The problem set that the architect faces. Just a few that I thought of as I was kind of going through this: zoning, costs, drainage, shadows, speed to build, sound, building efficiency, engineering, aesthetics, et cetera, et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. It just literally, like, I don't think most people appreciate how hard what you guys do
Mhm.
is to sort
Mhm.
of deal with all of that and
Mhm.
still come out with something that's
Mhm. Mhm.
financially viable,
Mhm.
attractive, isn't
Mhm.
isn't impossible to build.
Mhm.
Just how do you think through this? You may have the same answer, which is these design principles,
Mhm.
but how do you
Mhm.
think through navigating? I don't know. Is there 20? Is there 180? There's a lot of constraints on every single
Mhm.
deal that ever gets built. How do you guys think about just navigating through all of that?
No, you really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, there are a lot of things that we have to sort through, and it's ever evolving. And so, yeah, there are always these kinds of things. I guess what I would say is our approach to things. There's a couple of different things that I would say we do. One thing that is really important is that we try to find an overall premise that we know will satisfy um, a whole bunch of the criteria on the list without much fanfare. And it might be a strategy that would assemble buildings in a way so that they frame up nicely quickly, that they don't overextend the structural um, implications of things, that they sit on the site in an appropriate way, they leave room for things, et cetera. So once you've kind of created a backbone that satisfies a good hunk of the problem in a simple, straightforward way, then I think the part that enriches and makes it really interesting is when you dig into those moments that are going to transform that really simple diagram to something rich and amazing. This is akin to um, the rhythm section in a band laying down tracks that are gonna really set the tone for everything that comes. The melody in this case, or the all the stuff that gets laid on that relies entirely on the structure of that rhythm section. Needs can really dance over that sort of thing. And if you're really smart about it, you have reserved enough of your resources by being smart somewhere else to put it in another place where it really has high impact and makes a difference. And this is akin to when you look at a really simple um, engagement ring, where it's a simple gold band and a gem. The whole thing doesn't have to be encrusted with diamonds to be beautiful, but a whole bunch of the thing can be simple to really set it up for the part that is beautiful. So I think being really cognizant about how to make the most effect is really trying to solve the problem really straightforwardly and then enriching it. That's a strategy we use all the time.
A little bit Pareto principle, right? What's the 20% of the work that's going to solve 80% of the problem? And then from there, you get to come up with the melody and all the,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yep, definitely that. So there's that. And the other thing I'm going to say, the other really important consideration for us is that when we get, like, for instance, this idea about how you deal with stormwater in California is something that's really, we didn't have to deal with it at the early part of my career, but it's something that's really present in everything we do now. So when you're given something where you have to do it, my thing is, how do you leverage that to make something amazing out of it? Not like drag yourself to it and have to stick it in there in the corner somewhere where no one can see it or appreciate it. My thing is, man, if we have to do it, let's like amplify and take the best advantage of it. Let's turn it into something amazing. This is sort of why we sometimes refer to ourselves as architectural alchemists. I mean, the alchemy metaphor for us is, the classic mid ages idea was that somebody could figure out how to turn base materials into gold.
Mm-hmm.
So we oftentimes get a lot of base materials, and the alchemy piece of us from the design perspective is, how do you make gold out of it? So that's our task all the time. Is always searching for that.
All right. Well, let's take that um, and bring in this broader conversation of developer who has what was the three constraints you had talked about, which was the
Program,
site, the
budget,
budget,
site.
and the program. Right. That's
Mhm.
probably where you start most dialogue with a developer. Hey, I've got an acre site. I want to do 80 to 100 units on it, and it can't cost more than this because I think my NOI is going to land around here.
Mhm.
And so you and the developer work together, and you eventually come up with a full buildable set of construction drawings.
Mhm.
You hand that to a general contractor who
Mhm.
presumably can take that and deliver it for the developer at a specific cost. But
Mhm.
there's this incredible complex dance that's happening around the risk associated with the complexity of building anything. And so the
Mhm.
developers
Mhm.
hired you to say, hey, I don't really know how to do this. I don't really know what the best materials are. And of course, you guys are going to be allied with your structural, your MEP. Everybody's going to opine on like, okay, here's best practices. Let's get this. But then
Right.
he's going to hand those plans to GC and he'll say, yeah, I can do that for $20 million. Maybe. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
and then he might come back and say, these plans aren't complete. I don't understand how to build the joists in the third floor. Look at this
Mhm.
drawing.
Mhm.
I'm going
Mhm.
to make a request for information of the architect. And oh, that's different than what we had budgeted for. So here's
Mhm.
change order
Mhm.
number one. And I have clients who are at change order literally like 420. So, how does this entire complexity of building, like, at the end of the day, this is a team effort, but the
Mhm.
interest of at least those three players are quite unique. The general contractor just wants to build it and make his margin. The
Yes.
architect wants to put something together that's sound and complete enough that the general contractor is successful. The developer has a cap because his financing is $20 million. He might have $6 million of equity and 13-14 million dollars of debt, and that's it. Like if this
Mhm.
RFI RFP change order or sorry RFI change order thing starts to happen, the deal blows up.
Mhm.
I know this is the day to day.
Mhm.
This is like
Mhm. Mhm.
boots on the ground, rubber meets the road.
Yep.
How do you navigate this? What are like best practices? How does it go horribly wrong? What are your thoughts around this whole ecosystem?
Yeah. Well, I think you adequately described the motivations of the various characters in that tripart relationship. Yeah, and it's a big deal, and I've been talking a lot about what inspires us about the artfulness of the task, but really, there's a huge piece of this. This is about protecting my professional liability and my reputation, and making sure that we serve the clients as well as we possibly can. And if they can't build the thing we designed, we didn't serve them right.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a huge piece of this, which is all about making sure that we can deliver on the premise that we gave them. Um, so yeah, so we spend an awful lot of time in our work constantly learning from the experiences, constantly evolving our templates, and constantly teaching each other the best practices always. And so we are, as we're doing this, we're constantly trying to get better at it, and we will learn lessons along the way. I will also tell you that um, most of the work that we do involves a general contractor coming on earlier than a point where we're bidding to five of them at the end.
Okay.
Um, and so I think that's really an important consideration, because when you have someone whose responsibility is the means and the cost, and they're at the table early, you can make more strategic and intelligent decisions. Because if we went this way versus that way, there may be an implication that wouldn't bear itself out until you bid the project, right? So we're big advocates um, for somebody being engaged early in the process, and almost everyone we work with does it this way now. When we're working at universities, though, they can't do that. They have to, it's a public institution. They have to bid it out. So in those cases, we use really experienced cost estimating firms who have their fingers on the pulse of what the market is like for every commodity, every labor, all the kinds of things. What's the escalation expectation over time, et cetera. And we're making decisions all along the way in a university setting. We're back checking the model financially all the way through. So yeah, there's a lot of that has to really be strategic. I mean, I told you at the beginning or earlier in this broadcast, that I'm never going to ask you for more money. I'm going to ask you to trust me to spend the money you have wisely. And so, yeah, I take a lot of personal responsibility about that, and a personal sense of pride when we can deliver the project, at the budget intended, and get the results that everyone is enthused about. But
Yeah.
it's a conversation, and frankly, I think the other thing you have to think of it is not in a confrontational way. That's the very, very typical kind of thing. Is that architects and general contractors oftentimes are sort of at each other's. They're on different sides of the table, and so they tend to think of things with different motivations. Yes, but oftentimes what we're trying to assess is, what's the smartest and best way to get here? And sometimes we will run into situations in the field where, and there is no. Let me tell you, there is no perfect set of plans. There has never been, there will never be a perfect set of plans. It is not, that's not possible. You will run into conditions and situations always. Ideally, you're trying to minimize those and to keep it under control. But really, oftentimes, that creative thinking is really, that's where the rubber meets the road. When you're in a situation where the thing that you assumed, or the thing that was bid, the thing, whatever, isn't quite working the way you expected, how do you get to a resolved solution that is going to be affordable and still deliver the product that you all hope for? And sometimes it takes a lot of really creative thinking. I've had many, many situations where I've sat with the general contractor and the appropriate subcontractors, and I've had to say, okay, you can't do it this way. Tell me why. All right, how about if we do this instead of that? And let's talk through what is your constraint on how you fabricate that or how you install that? What can we do to make that easier? What can we do to cut your time? What can we do? And oftentimes in that kind of back and forth, the teamsmanship that comes from that results in an outcome that allows everyone to succeed. And that's what you're after.
That resonates. I feel like where these things go really wrong, especially lately, we've been in this very aggressive costs escalation environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so the general contractors, this is the other side of this. The developer wants to alleviate themselves of the risks of price changes. And so the general contractor tries to put a bracket around it and says, yeah, it's within 20 million, I can get this done. But if you go through a hyperinflationary period,
Mm-hmm.
that GC doesn't have any real world hedge to keep that cost contained. They just don't.
Right.
Hey, concrete's more, gypsum's up, copper's up, steel's up.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it ends up being that kind of adversarial relationship. And then it just seems like it really does go wrong. I don't know how you... Yeah, I think you're probably right. This is a different way of saying people-centered or people-focused, right? If you can keep those relationships intact and there's trust around the fact that nobody's trying to pull the wool over your eyes, right? Because that's part of this is oh, well, you bid it at 20 million. Everybody else was at 23. I went with you, and now you're going to try to get 25. I mean, these things can go very badly.
Yeah, no, I've seen every version of that for sure.
Yeah.
And I would say that most of the people we work with on the contracting side are upright, honest, communicative people, and we can work well with them. Absolutely. I've had situations where that GC didn't have those characteristics, and you have to take a different kind of tact in situations like that.
And how frequently do you guys influence the choice of general contractor with the developer?
I would say we usually have a pretty good. We're given a voice early on in the project. And a lot of our clients will ask us, here are 3 people I'm considering. Tell us about your experience working with them, and we can download what were the good and bad and who we recommend. Yes, and so a lot of times we have a pretty big say in this because people trust our prior experience. It's not perfect, but we generally get a good say. Sometimes the general contractors beat us to the project. Happens sometimes.
Does that affiliation or affinity that you might have with, general contractor X, does that show up in the other trades as well, where there's a crew of, oh, it's general contractor X, it's civil engineer X, it's MEP X,
Mhm,
structural
mhm.
engineer X, and you guys are on the regular working together, or do the teams and the deck shuffle quite frequently, and so you're always working with different people?
Well, they're never perfectly aligned, for sure. Every project has a different composition in some way, but sometimes it's nuanced between one and another. I mean, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural, and usually landscape all fall under our contract. So we bring those people to the proposal early on, and so
Okay.
we get to select those people ourselves. Usually, sometimes developers want to hire them individually, but there's some advantages and disadvantages in both versions. But oftentimes the civil engineer is hired by the client. Certainly, the general contractor we have nothing to do with, et cetera. Um, so yeah, I mean, yeah, it happens every single time. It's a little different, and it's all good. We try to work with everybody.
From the perspective of a developer, which I think is a reasonable portion of the audience here, what kind of tips or tricks might there exist? You already said one, which is try to get your general contractor involved in the discussions with the architect early in the process. You had actually said means and cost. Means, do you mean they just have the means to actually go vertical and build it?
When I say means, when we oftentimes say that the contractor is responsible for the means and methods, how are they doing it, and how are they sequencing their activities, et cetera. Meaning they organize themselves to implement the design in the field, in the world. So when I say means, I mean how they stage themselves, how they organize themselves, what sequence they do, who they bring to each task, et cetera.
Okay.
So yeah.
So in addition to getting a GC engaged early in the design process, what other things might be effective hedges for a developer to avoid these, catastrophic outcomes as it pertains to debating plans and costs?
Well, I think some of these things have to do with how you as a developer organize your contractual relationship with your builder. Um, there are things that can. I mean, for instance, if you do a straight stipulated sum contract, which means here are the plans, what's the price, all in to do that. And if you're doing that smartly, you will bid that to a couple different people. So you pick the best of those or whatever. And you have to think hard about whether the lowest price is your best price. Complicated, but nonetheless, a stipulated sum contract really does put an awful lot of pressure into the relationship and into the general contractor, because now they've either had to insert an awful lot of contingency across the board to make sure that they don't get injured, and that contingency is often placed line by line through the contract, and every single one of their subcontractors is putting contingency into their costs, and at the end the thing could escalate the overall cost so much that to protect everybody, that you end up paying more than you need to.
Yep.
Right. So I'm not a big fan of the stipulated sum contract. There are cost plus contracts where you have an open book with a contractor, and you talk about, okay, we're going to agree to your profit, overhead, and upcharges of any kind, and we're going to have open book on all the subs, and we'll agree on collectively on where we go. That one's a little bit better because that gives a developer some sense of control over it, but they also have to have a skilled staff or a skilled construction manager to advise them on their side. And that represents sometimes a cost or a capacity thing.
The general contractor has to have skilled staff in order to be able to bring in the right subcontractor base.
I'm saying that if you're going to do I'm saying that the developer in this case would have to have skilled staff or a skilled consultant on the construction management side in order to advocate for them. Because if you're going to have an open book, you want someone to be able to look at all those bids and say, yeah, this is BS. That's not going to work. That here's what they
I got
forgot.
you.
you know.
Yeah.
And if you're not skilled in those kinds of things, you can get hurt. So anyway, there's a couple different ways that one could make those things work, and what you're trying to do in a way is, I think, is to reduce the risk that you're imposing on somebody in order to get them to feel comfortable to give you the best prices, without in the end kind of injuring you on the backside to things that could flare up and cause problems. Some escalation in market conditions, et cetera, et cetera. Um, there is no perfect version of this, by the way,
No.
but some of these things would, if you take the heat off the relationship, you're going to be more successful over the long haul.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the ones I've seen that go the worst are the ones that get adversarial, right? And
Hmm. Yeah,
they're
for
ending up
sure.
in arbitration or lawsuits, and
Yeah.
then your project gets held up, and then you're facing a whole another array of costs and challenges with your lender, and
Yes,
it gets ugly very quickly.
definitely.
As it pertains to just running the business, I want to back out just a little bit. What is most holding back Studio E right now? You say you're actively hiring your 27 to 30 people. What's the constraint? Because it seems like if I'm hearing all of this right, you guys probably are at the top of the game, right? What is the constraint for you guys?
Well, I mean, it's interesting you should ask that question. I really don't think of us as constrained, but I guess what I would say is, there is this kind of balancing act between the size of the staff you make and your ability to have enough control over it, to do the thing that what inspired you in the first place.
Mm,
So, we're almost 30 people right now, and we're trying to get to 30 right now with the needs that we have in the office right now. But I will tell you that, um, when you run an office of 30 people, it's different than an office of 20 people. It's quite different. And so we're always trying to kind of, again, re engineer ourselves to do the right, smart thing. But I would say on some level, the constraints might be, related to making sure that we cultivate a team that is capable to do all the things that we need to do, and to be able to capture the opportunities out there that we really want to capture and do. There's projects out there that have all the ingredients to be something fantastic and great, and we want to do those. And there are projects out there that are going to, not be that are going to be perfectly sound and fine, but don't come loaded with all the opportunities. Yeah, I mean, balance between those two, I'd pick the first one over the second one, of course.
and at the beginning, you talked about how hard it is to get going. It sounds like now there are deals that you're okay saying no to. Um,
Hmm.
how did at what point did that show up? Was that something that you were able to carry from the early days and be very deliberate about where you put your talents, or is that a luxury that's a recent arrival?
I think that we have, well, I would say that we have had to turn down work for many years when the ingredients weren't right. And almost always was, did we have the capacity to be the best teammate to a person who was asking us to do it? And what I don't ever want to do is sign a contract under the promise that we can deliver and then not be able to do that. That would be horrible. So we have had to turn work away because we didn't have capacity or a window in our schedule to meet the schedule that they needed. So that's happened for many years, um, and we will always do that. I mean, honestly, if you're going to work with us, we're committing ourselves to making sure that we can get you to help you be successful. So we never want to be a hindrance to that.
Hmm. And what about just jobs that, aside from your internal constraints, you might just not like mm, the constraints? Maybe, and I don't mean
Hmm.
that in the sense of the program, I think is the language you're using. Um,
Hmm.
but just
Hmm.
maybe you don't like the client, maybe you don't like the zip code, maybe you don't like the product, maybe it's
Hmm.
micro units. I don't. How
Hmm.
about those deals? That you just kind of go, I don't really want to build that.
Well, yeah. I mean, we do go through a process where we're vetting out prospects and so on, and we're trying to ask ourselves whether or not we're a good fit. Um, And I think the good fit is some piece of that is, are we going to be able to help them, and are they going to be able to help us? Sometimes they're not spooled up to do that. I mean, they may be very inexperienced. They may have hopes and dreams of doing something, but if we're going to spend most of our fee teaching them how to do it, we're probably not the best character to do that. I mean, we have plenty of people who are experienced enough to know how to do things. And in other words, we can get into a race and step on the gas pedal fast and go. Um, and that's great. When we can do that, that's great. But there have been clients that we've worked with over the years where they weren't really spooled up to do that. We spent a lot of time kind of hand holding. And it's not that I'm anti hand holding or anything. It's just that on some level, that's not what we were necessarily hired to do. And if we end up spending a lot of our time and fee doing things like that, we're not getting to the end game. So yeah, if somebody doesn't demonstrate to us that they have the capacity to actually realize it, we may pass.
Yep, I understand that. That's a good no thank you.
Mhm.
Shifting over to the personal side a little bit, you've got quite a few professional distinctions, which I usually don't kind of drill into. But the key professor in Maryland, I understand, is a invite only thing that's extended to exceptional architects. You had 2 annual sort of stays there. The AIA Fellow, American Institute of Architects, which I understand is also maybe 3% of architects get it. And then the AIA Awards, which sounds like several of Studio E's projects and your projects have been awarded. I wonder, going back to the 6th or 7th grader who saw an aptitude for drawing and design and then went into ending up in Cal Poly and doing some other really great high level education. What's it like for you to receive? What's the experience of receiving that kind of recognition when you think back to the 6th or 7th grader that was a fair bit in the rearview mirror at this point?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I would say that that grader wasn't thinking, "Wow, I could win an award for this." It was just. It sounds like a lot of fun to do that as a job, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I will say that once you get into it, and honestly, the architecture profession is a highly competitive one, and it's really something when you're in college, in university, you really see it right there, because you get into design studios with 15 other people, and you have the same problem, the same deadlines, and you have to present at the end of the semester, and you've got to say, and so everyone can see different versions of things, and it's very competitive back and forth between architects. Always has been, always will be. Um, so on some level, a lot of the awards that we've won have been awarded by juries of our peers, and peers that we respect a lot, meaning we admire the work that they do. And when they can turn around and say, "Well done," that's an affirmation that's always worth having. I mean, anytime someone can say, "Well done, this is an exemplary project worth studying," that the rest of you in the profession ought to look to this as an example of how to do it right. Who doesn't want that? I mean, seriously, that's something that I think that it is always affirming. But I will tell you, when I was early on in this profession and I was out doing it, I used to just sweat it when it was time for the awards juries to go. Are they going to select our project? Well, and really worry about it. I don't worry about it so much anymore. When we win, I'm very happy to win, but I don't lose any sleep if we don't. Um, and I guess some level of that is just getting to a level of maturity and kind of self affirmation, frankly. Um, but yeah, it's cool to win, and it's cool to be recognized, and it's cool to be able to say, to be able to brag on what you've done. Um,
Absolutely. You mentioned that design or architecture is highly competitive, and it always will be. I was thinking of this in our earlier discussion, and figure I could bring it back up now. Um, so it's March 2024. Artificial intelligence has been
mhm,
splattered all over the news media for at least the last 6 to 8 months, and there's incredible advances happening
mhm,
in all
mhm.
different disciplines and applications. I wonder how you are perceiving the repercussions for AI in the world of architecture? Is it there now? Will it be there soon? Is it going to make any meaningful change?
Oh, it absolutely is going to. I mean, we're testing a program right now that allows you to kind of put a site anywhere in the world and drop a program into it, and tell it you want it to be so many stories, and you want it to be based around a courtyard, and the thing will just sort of assemble a version of the program for you. And it's, I will say it's crude, and it's, but really what it's about is affirming whether or not you can fit the thing that you want on there, but it doesn't design it per se. But who the heck knows? I mean, at some point can you get to the point where we're going to have machines design these things? God, I hope not. But I mean, who the heck knows? I'm going to say that this might be a moment in design that might be akin to what happened at the beginning of the modern art movement. And what ended up happening then, in my opinion, and other scholars have expressed this idea, it isn't just my opinion, is that painting, prior to the advent of photography, its primary role was to capture reality and to present it over time. And so it was highly realistic. It was highly focused on realism. And after a camera could do most of that work for you, painting evolved into something else. First, it went into Impressionism, where it became evoking the feeling or spirit of something, but still generally trying to evoke the world as you saw it through a lens of a camera. And then it turned into Cubism and other kinds of modern art movements that were completely different, because it was trying to convey something that you could never capture with a camera. So I guess I'm curious as to whether or not AI is going to create a kind of similar revolution in all kinds of things that we do, where we're looking for the kind of presence of the person still in that, and not just the presence of the machine. I'm not enthused by the idea that the world would only be the presence of the machine.
That's interesting. So the correlation there is that the digital expression of this intelligence algorithm, however we want to sort of put language to that, would be the same as the photograph. And so we'll have that perfect sanitized expression, but the impressionists will come along, the cubists will come along. Yeah. I think that's likely. And I think, I actually have been saying it this way. Fire, electricity, AI. Like, I think the implications of this will be as large as fire and electricity. I have no idea how. I know there's a lot of people freaked out about it. And I think back to, Chicago and New York, and the concerns for the loss of jobs for the people who were running around scooping up horse manure as the automobile came in. Like, there's going to be another wave of prosperity and a change in the work that we do that I don't think any of us can understand. It's not unlike the moment when we all started getting AOL CDs, and we're like, what the hell is this thing? Right.
Exactly.
The internet.
Right.
I think it's going to be fascinating. I like what you're saying. I do think it's likely to go where we're supercharged. We have electricity. We have power tools. We have heat in our buildings. We have artificial intelligence. We're going to have this augmentation. And on top of that is still going to be the creative soul, right? The expression and the understanding of where you started, right? The understanding of the human condition and how to be of service to it. It's cool.
Yeah. Exactly.
Daily routines. So for me, there's a big sort of jump, but we'll be fine. I think if I can, you sort of cue up my mind and get my priorities aligned, or remind myself of them for the myriad of ways I show up as a father, a business person, or a community member, or a husband, all of the above. Then I might walk into the day a little bit better primed to take the field and perform well. I wonder if you have any routines or habits or rituals that inform your like either the practice of life, you were sort of alluding to, getting a certain amount of self-confidence or self-awareness
Hmm.
as it pertains to the awards, or the practice of being an architect and running a business and having 30
Hmm.
people who are looking up to you for
Hmm.
which way is this firm going? What are we doing now?
Hmm. Right. Well, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. How do you structure your life in a way that you can do all the things you need to do, and thrive and be happy? I think that's kind of where your question is going. So
Yeah.
I guess the rituals that I rely on in a way, I try to get enough sleep every night. I do my best to make sure that I wake up refreshed. So that's one thing. I've been really working hard on that because I used to be a kind of go to bed late, wake up late if I could kind of person. So I've been training myself to be more about that. But I would say that where I get my batteries recharged is that every night my wife and I, we're now empty nesters. Every night my wife and I have dinner together and have these long and rich conversations about our day, about what happened, about what that all means, about where we're going next, dreaming about our future, talking about our sons and where they're going next and our friends. So that's a really rich piece of my life every single day that I rely on. The other thing that I have is this really profoundly great group of friends who that we meet every other week for dinner. Like last night, it was at our house, and so we had 16 people sitting around the table at our house having one of the most raucous, noisy, hilarious, and fun evenings ever. And they're like this every 2 weeks. And so the richness of the community that I have just makes every bit of difference in the quality of my life. And so that's helpful. And the last thing I have is that I have terrifically great partners and peers here. I have people who I respect, admire, trust, and believe in, and likewise do the same for me. And those relationships just make all the difference in the world. So yeah, those are my rituals, and then I try to take care of myself. So try something new every day. That's my advice: is cut a new neural pathway if you can.
There you go. And you've had partners. I think you shared with me, you started Studio E with yourself and one other. That other was replaced or stepped out fairly soon. And then you had
Mm-hmm.
a separate partner. And now you have five partners. You may have just said it with the idea of respect, admire, trust, and believing in your partners. But what kinds of principles or beliefs have you seen enable you to have what I perceive as a successful partnership for almost 40 years? I mean, partnerships are difficult.
Mm-hmm.
How are you guys doing that?
Well, I think a business partner in a lot of ways is akin to a marriage partner. You don't do these things lightly. You think hard about whether or not you're going to be able to work together and see the world and closely enough to each other that you can get along, but different enough that you can enrich each other. So those things are akin to that. Yeah. So these things all happen over time, and they didn't. I mean, we've been at this for 37 years, so it takes a while to really make sure that you're a good fit together. But
Hmm.
yeah, so and you know that you can trust and believe in somebody, and that they give you the resources back. Yeah, you find out pretty early on.
Hmm. I dig it. So entrepreneurs of all sizes and shapes, right? In our industry, it could be an aspiring architect, it could be an aspiring developer, it could even be an engineer or other consultants that might be thinking to go on the journey that you've been on for 37 years. What sort of ideas or thoughts might you have to share with somebody who, yeah, they could be at the beginning, or they actually could just be getting beat up 9 years into it and trying to remember why they're doing this? What sort
Mhm.
of thoughts do you have about the journey for an entrepreneur, and sort of how to stay the course?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm gonna say something that sounds contradictory, but I do have an intention about it. One of which is there's some piece of you that has to have enough belief that you'll stay the course even when your present circumstances are not rewarding you. You have to have enough belief in and enough kind of thoughtful imagination about it that you're going to believe that that's going to work, right? And I think some pieces sustain the course. Some pieces on the flip side is having the capacity to be agile, the ability to kind of assess the situation you're in and to be able to move in a way that's thoughtful and meaningful when things are not perfectly aligned. So, and I think it's that dance back and forth between having a long-standing vision about what you want to do and the ability to kind of read the circumstance and to be able to move quickly into the thing that is going to hopefully get you to place. And then lastly, is just trust yourself, trust who you are, but don't lose sight of the fact that you're imperfect and you can always get better at it.
Right on. Eric, we've gone probably longer than you had anticipated. I appreciate you very much taking the time to have this conversation. I'll leave it to you for any final words you might want to drop, or if you want to mention. I know if anybody just Googles Studio E architecture, they'll be able to find you, but the mic is yours, and thank you, and thank you the listeners for coming along with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you asking, and I was keen for you when you asked to be able to talk about, the perspective that somebody in the architecture world maybe brings to a set of relationships that I think oftentimes people think they rely on the skill set that we have, but I think hopefully they think of us as partners. Anyway, so I thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell that story. But I do think that, to kind of close out for me, I get up every morning and I'm excited to do what I do. And I wish that for anybody and everybody. And I hope that they have that chance. So thank you.
Never have to work a day in your life, right?
Well, yes. Sometimes it's work.
Yes,
sure.
Of course.
But it's all good. Having that bigger picture helps you endure it.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you.